All right. So thank you so much, Sam, for joining me today. I'm really excited about our conversation. Maybe before we get started, can you maybe introduce yourself and let everyone know what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Sam. I am finishing up hopefully my last year of my PhD in clinical psychology, but I've been a licensed therapist for about 10 years now. And part of how we met through a group that we're in is I do like some side VA work, but am in a founders group because I'm the chief support officer of an organization called Just a Girl Global that provides mental health support and community supports for women from, I would say, early childhood through adulthood.
All right, great. And how did you end up in this space of therapy? And even, yeah, how did you even end up, wanting to do a
Yeah,
PhD?
there was a book that I read my freshman year of college called Savage Inequalities.
Oh,
Uh, it's a nonfiction book by this journalist, Jonathan Kozol. And I grew up in New Jersey on the East Coast of the US. And there's a town called Camden right on the border of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Uh, that it's gotten a lot better, one of the worst areas in the country. And I initially lived there as a child. My dad worked in local government there. And then the town next door was extremely wealthy. And this book is basically about the inequalities that exist for children in those two towns. And he interviewed these children. So he didn't interview adults. He interviewed these like 5 to 8-year-old kids about the differences they notice in the quality of the education they get. And reading that book, as I started to do student teaching, I was like, man, I don't really know if I can be a teacher. I feel like I have to do something else because I would be in these districts, not in the greatest areas, a lot of inequality, low income, not a lot of funding around education. But most of my kiddos were coming in not having enough sleep at night, not having enough food at home. And I sort of felt like, how am I teaching them multiplication right now? That feels really off to me. And so started studying psychology and got into the therapy space over time.
that's amazing. And so my mom actually was in education my entire life. She was actually, I don't know if I told you this, but my high school principal and she ended up being the director at at one of the schools I went to. And I think it's so interesting that you're talking about teachers having to play all these roles. And that's something my mom talks about as well. Even though I did, I would say I was quite privileged. I went to an international school, a private school, but yet teachers still had to fill some of these different roles. So that's really interesting how you transitioned.
Oh, yeah. And I think teachers play therapists so often, but I think, first of all, teachers are not paid enough. They don't have enough training to do some of these things. And no matter what school you're in, right? Like, we don't know what goes on in other people's homes. And so even I know growing up, we ended up moving to like a public school district that was pretty well to do. My parents chose it because of like the rating it had. But I remember having friends who definitely like had some stuff going on at home and didn't really have anyone to talk about, or were struggling with their own mental health issues, especially like in high school, and teachers would kind of be like pulling them aside or trying to get them help. And I think for me, it was like, I don't know if I can wear this many hats. And I also don't know if I would feel like that intrinsic motivation to teach if I knew that like there were so many other things my kiddos needed.
Yeah. I'd love for us to talk maybe a little bit about what you've gotten to in terms of your research.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd love to hear. Yeah, tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
maybe what you're doing for your PhD.
Yeah. So I've been working in New York City at a hospital doing parent-infant mental health work. So we do a lot of dyadic therapy. So the mom and the baby are there. And a lot of people say like, well, babies don't need therapy. And there's a level of that, but there's also a lot of research around attachment theory that shows, and also just trauma work that shows that trauma can be transmitted intergenerationally. A lot of the initial research around that came out of the Holocaust, moved on to look at racial inequalities, moved on to look at actually like sexual abuse and how like feelings around that can be transmitted from mother to child or primary caregiver to child. And so looking at all of that and having these new moms or these foster moms, or once in a while these dads come in with a history of long-term trauma, what we see is that sometimes parents start to place these negative attributions on their very young children because maybe they look like, you know, dad, and dad was maybe not a good person. Or they yell a lot because they're two and they just like to yell because they found their voice, but it's reminiscent of a trauma that the caregiver had experienced. And so I started to notice, and there's a ton of research already around this, but the parent-child relationship is so crucial for the child to learn proper social emotional development and to just develop language skills, gross motor skills, fine motor skills, but also for the parent to feel confident, right? You want a parent to feel confident in their parenting abilities, want to feel that there's a strong connection between them and their child, the same for the child, so that other relationships grow to be really positive as well. Your primary caregiver is really your first close relationship, and there's actually a lot of relationship around attachment and how your attachment as a baby with your parent can influence your attachment on your romantic partner later in life. So knowing all of this and working with these families, what I started to notice was an extreme discomfort of like engaging with their child in the therapeutic space. So I remember I had like a 3-year-old climbing a bookcase, and I had said to the mom, the type of therapy we do, we really want the parent to feel the autonomy of being that parent. So rather than me going over there, although internally I was sort of a mess, I was like, this bookshelf's gonna fall, we're gonna have a major accident in here. I was saying like, oh, it seems like he's really trying hard to reach something. Maybe we could go help him get down. The mom was kind of like, oh, I don't know. Like, I think he'll figure it out. And eventually I had to intervene in that moment because it was just too dangerous. But I started to realize like, oh, this mom is really uncomfortable interacting with him. And so then as I was explaining to him like why it's so fun to climb, and like lots of animals climb and we can climb on the monkey bars and all of these other things, why we couldn't climb on a bookcase, he was totally fine with it and went to another toy and started like throwing a ball towards me and mom. And again, mom sort of like looked at him, didn't do anything. And I was like, oh, it looks like he's trying to get you to play catch with him. And she was like, I don't really know how. And I had this immediate thought of like, you don't know how? And then I had this other thought of, she may have never played catch, or she may just be so uncomfortable with the idea of playing based on her experience that she just doesn't even want to try because it might feel yucky. And I started to notice this more and more with the families I worked with of, they come in, we have all these fun toys in the office, and these kids would immediately go to mom or dad or the primary caregiver to play with them, and the parent would just sort of sit in a chair by my desk. Mm-hmm. And so eventually these kids would sort of give up and then come over to me, or they would leave the room and try and find someone else, because innately we're playful beings. You know, there's just research on playfulness in general and how brain size is indicative of play. So you think about, if rats are playful, we have much larger brains. We're going to be really playful human beings. And so my dissertation is looking at exploring perceptions of and understandings of play amongst new mothers who have a serious mental illness, with the idea that if someone is struggling with mental health issues, there's so much stigma around that typically, and there's so much research that shows how these women are greatly impacted by childcare, foster care, court cases, domestic violence, that I'm curious about their understanding of play and whether this was even something that they'd experienced as a child. A lot of children, we sort of take for granted that we all play as children. A lot of children have other responsibilities, or they maybe have a very depressed parent or a parent with mental health issues who doesn't show them how to play. You know, even things like mimicking your baby when they're born is a form of play. And a lot of women who have postpartum depression, anxiety, OCD, they're not in a place to be able to even do that. So what some of the earliest forms of play these children don't have exposure to.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for taking us through that. And I, you know, when we first had this conversation, I was so fascinated by this concept of play, right? And I think I told you that this is something that I started to have conversations with the leaders I work with about. You know, if someone is, I mean, I know that you're working with
Yeah.
children and with mothers. But if someone is thinking about, okay, how can I incorporate more play into my life, more play with others? What are some of the steps or thoughts that you would suggest be shared with them?
Yeah, so I think one of the things for me is like reevaluating self-care. I think we sort of like the pop psychology idea of self-care of like taking a bubble bath doesn't work for everyone. And it's interesting, when I started looking into play, I was looking at like, what are the adult theories around play? And all I could find, which is pretty sad, is like gaming and theories around games and the rewards of games. And then in older adults, like 65 and up, how when they've retired, they find these like pleasant activities that they enjoy doing. And so there's theories around finding sort of hobbies to make up for the fact that we're not working. And I thought that was absurd, because why should a hobby replace work? You should have hobbies when you're working. If you're 25 and working and you don't have a hobby, what are you doing to relieve the stress that comes from work? Or if you're working and you enjoy what you're doing, how do you incorporate play into that work? And I think so part of it's reevaluating your self-care, right? I think everyone needs to incorporate play in some way. And I've asked adults before, and part of my research is asking these adults, how do they play now? I've gotten reading, playing video games, and taking walks. And I thought, well, that is play. And here's the big problem. If you look up definitions of play, there's about 75 different working definitions of play. So no one really knows what it is. But I think in my mind, a definition of play is doing something that boosts your creativity and you enjoy doing, and allows you the freedom to sort of pick and choose what path you go on, almost like a choose your own adventure. So if you find that ideating at your job is something that makes you feel creative, but maybe you start to throw in like the most crazy ideas, like far-fetched ideas, to me, that's being playful at work. But it's allowing yourself the space to do that. Or if reading is really your like absolute favorite playful activity, are you in like a book club where you can have like playful conversations with people where you imagine yourself as those characters? Like, what are we doing to boost that creativity and imagination through things that we find playful? Or even like, it sounds really silly, but I realize I really like to cook. So it's figuring out, how can I be playful with my cooking? So sometimes my husband and I will watch these like ridiculous YouTube videos on really crazy things people put in food, and then we try them. I will let everyone know on that same token, ketchup ramen is not good. My husband will differ. It's terrible. But I think it's finding those ways to expand your imagination and creativity through anything you do that you find enjoyable. My hope is one day there's a bit of a clearer definition around play, but I think when people think of self-care, yes, that's true, but I almost see it as, do you have emotion regulation strategies to help you calm down when you're stressed? That's not care. That's not self-care. That's like stress management. Then I see this other level of play. Are you able to find things that you enjoy to do, that you incorporate on a daily basis, that expand your creativity and imagination? That's play. Somewhere in the middle is this level of self-care, right? Sometimes we have to do things in terms of our nutrition and exercise to take care of ourselves, but I sort of challenge everyone to then move forward on that continuum of, how do you turn that self-care into something playful? Or how do you even turn like the mundane day-to-day tasks into something playful? Like you and I talked about our love of colored pens.
Yes.
And like, I love to make a to-do list every day to start off my day, but I always try and figure out like a new topic that I can call it instead of like my to-do list. That's sort of my way of starting the day off in a playful way. Or sometimes if I get real crazy, which everyone thinks is a little bit too much, I'll like alternate colors. And it's just something that I have fun doing. And then I'll look at it throughout the day and kind of smile at like this thing that I've decided to do. Yeah. Or even, it sounds silly, but if I have to sit in on a meeting, I'll like have a coloring book out with me and I'll just like color during the meeting because I'm very fidgety. But I I also like the idea of creating a product. So there's even in a meeting last week, I was painting a block because I had found these animal blocks for my son. And I was like painting these blocks in this meeting and found it so much easier to focus because I was also working on this like fun project I was excited about. So I think, again, it goes back to like, how do you find these ways to have fun, be creative, reimagine things, whether it's in your day-to-day work life or what you're doing outside of work.
No, I love that. And I also love that you took us through that spectrum of like, there's some things that you need to do, right? That stress management, that self-care part, which sort of goes between that play and then that stress management. And then finally the next level, which is that play. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you for all those really, I think, concrete examples as well. I think those would be very helpful to people. And I think those are, some really great first steps as well. What would you say to someone who says things like, okay, I don't have time for this, or it makes me look silly, right? Because those are some of the negative thoughts that we might have or that might go through our minds, thinking about incorporating more play.
Yeah. And so I think it's doing what you're comfortable with, right? Like, I think if you asked me 5 or 6 years ago, would I be comfortable painting blocks in a work meeting? Absolutely not. I think now people know this about me and also would much rather have me focus than fidgeting. Also, where most of us are working at home most of the time, so no one can really see what we're doing. But I think the other thing is, it makes sense. We have to validate ourselves for all of these like negative attributions that we construct, right? I imagine if each person went back into their life, there is someone or something that they observed or witnessed that helped them form this schema or like this rule of like, you can't play at work, or like, that's not how work's supposed to be. And I even think like, if you think about just, if you have parents that are maybe in the boomer generation or even a little bit younger, like work in the 80s and 90s was very different than what it is today. And I know especially for me, coming from parents in that generation, their perception of work is also a lot different. If I said to my parents like, oh, I work for this Just a Girl, it's like a startup, I think my dad's head would explode. Like anytime I mention startup, he's like, oh, because there's like this judgment around like, well, is that real? Like, how are they sustaining their money over time? And I think then I sort of have this attribution of like, oh, I should just get a job for like an insurance company or something that's like stable because that's how my parents sort of believe things to be. And I think it goes the same for play, right? Like, I know especially for me, it was like, it's okay to play when you're little, but like, as I got older, it was like, oh, you don't need these toys anymore. Now you're like 10 or 12, there's these different concepts I think that we all sort of take in and make sense of in order to sort of be functioning people in society. And I think it's first reevaluating like, what are the beliefs that you have and where did they come from, and validating negative beliefs. Negative beliefs don't go away when you're like, get out of my brain. They go away when we validate and say, it makes total sense you feel that way. Let's try a little play and see where we go from here. So it kind of sounds like I'm saying talk to yourself, but yeah, talk to yourself a little bit. Validate that negative part of you that feels that way, and then go on to say, what are small things I can do? If you're watching this and thinking, that's crazy, I would never like have colored pens on my desk all day, or I wouldn't paint or something like that. It's even like, if you really enjoy a game, allowing yourself time to play that game on a break. If you really find yourself wanting to be playful, throwing out like a silly idea in a meeting, or maybe ending your emails with like a funny joke and seeing what people respond with. How is it that you can start to build on that and grow your comfort? And if it feels super duper uncomfortable, then I always say to people, I love therapy, I'm a therapist, but it's not bad to talk to someone else and get some ongoing support and feedback. And like, how can I actually shift negative beliefs? If I have all these negative beliefs about myself and the world around me, is it maybe that I need an external perspective on that too?
Fair. Yeah. No, I like that. And I think what I really like about what you're saying as well is that you're saying incorporate it, because I think too often we say to ourselves, oh, I'll get to that after work or later. that's that other part of me, but really just trying to incorporate all of us, right? Or all of you, because there's so many different parts to us.
Yeah. I have a colleague at work who like has a whiteboard on her door, and every day she writes like a quote that she finds on the subway, and that's sort of her way of playing, right? And like she has little post-its and you can like leave feedback. So even if we're all busy during the day and you don't get time to talk to each other, she is like playing with us by even just inviting us to have like a playful conversation. And she finds some quotes I'll like literally write on a post-it. I don't even get what this means because it is like something from an ancient philosopher and I legitimately don't, or I'll come up with like my own ridiculous meaning. So that's our way of playing back and forth with each other. I think there is this idea, I think, that play is like playing with toys, or is like, doing something so playful all the time, or it's something that's completely separate. Like my husband works, but then he used to take improv classes. So that was like very playful, but it was like, this is this thing I do at night that's separate. No one at my job knows I do that. Why not? Like that's a really fun, cool thing. Also, improv skills are great at work. I think companies should have people take improv classes. So it's like, I think there's this stigma, just like many other stigmas that exist, that we sort of have to break barriers down related to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And in the day and age of a lot of us working from home or remotely, any suggestions on how to sort of incorporate play, maybe beyond colorful pins that we both
Yeah,
share?
yeah. I would say find ways, if you're interested in playing with other people, finding ways to do that, right? Like I instituted with my colleagues once a month during our weekly meeting. Have you ever done those Jackbox games online?
What is that? No.
Yeah. So Jackbox is like a game company and it's online, and one person hosts on their screen and then everyone watches it, but you log in through your cell phone with like a code. And so you can have like up to 6 people and there's all different games. Our favorite one is like you get random words and you have to draw a t-shirt design. I'm a terrible artist and drawing on your phone is not easy. So it like gets us a real good laugh, but we do that once a month in meetings. I have colleagues who send out jokes regularly. I have a boss who on Fridays sends out this email of like all of her thoughts for the week, but it's like this very playful, like, here's her take on like this ridiculous email we got earlier in the week, or what she's doing over the weekend. We now have a Slack channel called Random Stuff, and it's just pictures people post of like, someone had a squirrel in their backyard yesterday. They posted a picture of it. I think it's anything that sort of gives you a laugh and breaks down that barrier of like, I have to be prim and proper and like, this is what I have to do. I also think just at home, right? How you cook, what you eat, what you spend your time doing at home. Maybe there's something you've always wanted to do, but you've never done it. Why not take a chance and test that out now? And I really like what you said about not just waiting. My husband and I have always wanted to start a podcast together. So we like finally said, okay, we're just going to like record a random session and see what happens in that. But we were always like, after we do these other things, we're home. I could even do it on like a 30-minute break or something. There's not a rule of what has to be done or what can be done. It's how do you incorporate it throughout? And so I think you can incorporate it in work or in your personal life. And you can also share that with other people, like through a Random Stuff Slack channel.
Yeah, no, I love all these ideas. And my hope is that people listening can now really take some of these and like implement, right? Super actionable. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your work at the startup, because I loved the title as well. Can you remind us of the title?
Yeah, so it's called Just a Girl. And the goal is, and the founder, Kirsten, has just been great. The goal was she had worked in business for many years and realized there was this disconnect between how we support individuals within our companies and how we build their mental health. And so right now we're working on an app so that everyone can access it for free. But basically we do trainings on mental health, psychological first aid, how to develop a self-care plan. I think there's not enough stuff that exists around like what true self-care is. There's just a lot of like judgments around very specific forms of self-care. So it's kind of like, if you don't fit into those categories, what do you do? But we do a lot of trainings around that. And then we just consult with companies on like how to promote a more inclusive and equitable group, and how do we provide those mental health services or those additional emotional supports to enhance well-being, no matter what level you are in a company or in an organization. And then we also do trainings with larger organizations to talk about how do you provide the support to your clients. So organizations that work with individuals who have experienced a disaster or are impacted by, COVID in a greater way, how do we provide those community emotional supports?
Yeah, all sound like amazing stuff. So for maybe for someone who, is within a company that's just sort of starting up, what are some of your tips for that founder or the leaders within that organization in terms of thinking about mental health? What should they be thinking about first?
I think it's first having, if you are, starting up and you're providing benefits, making sure that mental health is included. Often mental health is not an included benefit, even if it's through an EAP program, even if it's through having your HR rep coming up with a list of resources just to have that. I think so often it's not a preventative problem. It becomes something that's post, and it's problematic when your employee is struggling, or when you say, hey, this doesn't exist and I need this service, and then you're scrambling to find it. I think mental health is something everyone struggles with at various points in their life. So the more prepared you can be, the better. And I think also it shows that you're really conscious of that. I also think, and I know this is a challenge for a lot of organizations, but having like a self-care or like a de-stress day, even if it's every couple of months, giving your colleagues like a random half day on a Friday to just go take care of themselves, I think is really, really important to show that you value them, and that you also value taking care of yourself above the job, right? We see these people who work themselves to the bone, can't get off of email. And I think that's really important. I think also modeling that and having it when you start a company as part of your policy, right? Like everyone should have an automated email on the weekend. There should be policies around not feeling like, even if you feel it, right? Not feeling that your company is promoting you to respond to emails throughout the weekend. Things of that nature, I think, are super crucial.
I love that. And that's definitely something I'm going to be talking to my clients about. And I think sharing a little bit more too, because I agree. I think it's really all about modeling the behavior that you expect, right? Because so often we say, well, I was in an organization and that's what the leader did, therefore. So really breaking that cycle. I like that a lot.
Yeah. And I think it's all like, it's also, practicing what you preach. So if you're starting a company and there's just two of you, start that off the bat. So when you bring people on, you already have this sort of setup designed to really ensure that you're taking care of yourself, and then you can take care of the employees that are working for you.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And it's not something that we think about a lot. I mean, when I look back to my time, I just naturally just have to stop. I'm just one of those people who's like, I'm tired, go home. With my employees, when they got sick, I was like, go home. Like that's just sort of how I always did things. I didn't know any better. There was no other environment that I was in that I could like refer to like have to not allow people off, or say that you have to work until 10, because that never really happened to me. But so many of my other colleagues did not. They were like, what are you doing? That's not how it works. It's a startup. And I'm just like, nah, man, I'm tired.
Yeah. And I also, it's also figuring out, like, it always amazed me. I had started another like mental health startup at one point that I had left, and my co-founder was always emailing like in the middle of the night at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And then I felt such a pressure to respond when I woke up. And then I was like so angry with myself, like, oh my gosh, it's 7 a.m. and I'm just responding now. What was I doing at 2 o'clock in the morning? I was sleeping. That's normal. I should be sleeping at that time. But I remember a friend of mine who's a business coach had said to me, like, you have to set the boundary of like, these are my working hours. And if you want to email me because you work better at that time, that's totally okay. but I don't work well at that time. And so I'll respond during these hours because these are the times I work well.
Yeah, I love that. So it's like not just setting boundaries externally of you, but also internally, right? Reminding yourself like, I don't need to.
Absolutely. And I even think it's like, it sounds silly, but initially when I was trying to set my own boundaries to take care of myself, I would set all these reminders on my calendar of like, log off your computer at like this time, or like, you know, do not start responding to emails until this time.
No, I love that. I've tried to do that a bit. So like there's a certain set of emails that I only will try and respond to once a week and put that in
Yeah.
my calendar. And then just, you know, it relieves a lot of pressure because I feel like, oh, I'm going to miss something. I'm going to forget it. But it's like, nope, I have that time I've carved out just for that.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is if you're someone who works well at night, that's amazing. And I want you to be able to respond at night. Sometimes I feel like that's the only time I have to respond to things, but it's also like setting the expectation. I'm not expecting you. And I've actually said this in emails to people. I'm like, I know it's late. This is the time that I can work tonight. Please feel free to respond when you're able. I know it's really late. Just to kind of like acknowledge that, like respecting each other's boundaries. I think that's one of the basic tenets of having this like self-care.
Yeah, no, I love it. Self-care is more than just getting your nails done. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Or taking a bubble bath.
The two big ones. Yes.
Yeah.
Important, but not
I
the
have a client who's allergic to bubble bath. And I was like, well, then this is not going to work for you at all.
All right. So what's next for you, Sam? What are you looking forward to?
So I am in the midst of getting my like dissertation formally approved, and then hopefully collecting a few more interviews and I'm starting the analysis process. And then I'm really looking forward to publishing this because there's really very little research on play in adulthood or how we understand play. And so I just think that if this can shed a little light, maybe it'll inform other people who want to look into this but haven't taken the jump yet. Or maybe I'll be able to do a little bit more research in this arena, but I just think it's like an untapped area where we don't know a lot about it. And so clinically, I'm interested in how that can help people, but also just from a general standpoint, right? Like I think we talk a lot about self-care nowadays, which is amazing, but why does it just have to be like self-care? Why not sort of go up Maslow's hierarchy of like, you know, actually being able to do things that you want to do and creating space for that in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, I love it. Well, best of luck with your dissertation. Yeah. I know I'm looking forward to seeing your results and continue to have conversations. Was there anything else you wanted to share or mention?
No, I think that, you know, all I can say is that I think if you find a way to incorporate playfulness, even just like in one small way every couple of days, and start to build up that muscle, it's just like riding a bike. And I think the emotional benefits are just so huge.
Yes, I think that's a great way to end. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you too.
All right. Bye.